Delighted to welcome Business Minister Nadhim Zahawi to the show. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
Lots to talk about this morning. Can we start with that IMF report yesterday, which made very gloomy reading, downgraded their already very miserable forecast for the world economy to 4.9% contraction over this year and recovery next year, hopefully 10.2% contraction for the UK economy, down from previous predictions. Are you concerned that things are a lot worse than we thought on the economy and that the easing of the lockdown, although some people are criticising it for being too soon, is actually too late and we are going to have a much steeper hill to climb?
Well, I think this pandemic emergency was really in three chapters. Chapter one was responding to the emergency and asking people to stay at home, protect the NHS and save lives, where the Chancellor quite rightly wrapped his arms round jobs and the economy, hence the furlough scheme and, of course, bounce back scheme and all the other schemes were designed with that in mind, to save as many jobs in the economy as possible, over 9 million people getting their wage packet through furlough. The next phase, the next chapter, if I can describe it as that, is now as we get the economy back on its feet, opening up, and the Prime Minister on the 1st of June opened up car showrooms and outdoor markets, 15th of June, the rest of retail, 4th of July, restaurants, pubs, and we're laying a bill today to make it easier for people to have alfresco dining outside their favourite restaurants and bars. All that is important, and the interventions we make in the economy we review. So furlough is extended and made more flexible, and we look at all our interventions that we help businesses get back on their feet, get back to making sure they're selling and making a profit. And then the final chapter is what stimulus can you inject in the economy, both financial and non-financial, to make it easier to invest, to grow your business, to do more business, and to hire more people. Some people have clearly will not be returning to their current roles because their companies are changing, they're right-sizing their businesses as such. So there's a lot of work. Alok Sharma, the Secretary of State, has been deep diving on a recovery task force with businesses, with business representatives, so that we can make sure the recovery is as dynamic as we can make it, to build back better, looking at green investment, looking at making sure that we listen to business and take their ideas and translate that into action.
And what do you feel about businesses who are desperately trying to keep afloat? They've locked down, not only have had no money coming in, they've had to furlough workers, but they've basically been hemorrhaging cash and all their savings, if they've got any, in recent months, raising their prices. I understand that ministers have warned the likes of pubs and restaurant owners and indeed hair salons and pretty much across the board shops, don't raise prices this time because this would be price gouging. We know that some traders, were doing this with, say, hand sanitizer and things during the early stages of the pandemic. But why shouldn't a small business or even a big business desperate to keep themselves afloat, why shouldn't they be charging more, given that they've got more costs and they have to have fewer customers because of social distancing rules to make ends meet? What's wrong with that?
Well, in the case of shortages of supply, as we saw with hand sanitizers, as you mentioned, and any other product, it is absolutely wrong to price gouge, and we will come down on it really hard. In terms of charging a price for your service, the best protection for the consumer is competition. People can choose, they can vote with their feet where they go to have their hair done or where they go to have a drink or a nice meal. And so I think making sure that all restaurants, all pubs get to reopen safely. Obviously, businesses have to make a risk assessment of how they can do that with the 1 meter plus mitigation, whether it be more hand sanitizing points, maybe screens, other measures. We're asking all restaurants to take reservations with a name and telephone number so that if we need to test and trace, we can very quickly to remain ahead of the virus. But competition ultimately is the greatest protection for the consumer.
Yeah, exactly. So you're not saying there should be a rule against these people trying to make some extra cash to keep and make ends meet. I mean, I booked a pub and I booked a restaurant on July the 4th. I'm quite happy to pay extra. It's not human right to go to the pub. Felt like it for 3 months, but you're right to go to the pub or go to a restaurant. For them to keep afloat, keep those businesses going, keep everyone on the staff in a job, I think it's only fair we have to pay a bit extra. That's reasonable.
Well, as I say, people will vote with their wallets, right?
Yep.
People go to the pub, their favorite restaurant, and support
Okay.
that business. And competition is what keeps markets healthy and honest.
Okay.
Ultimately.
All right. Let's talk about keeping everything healthy and honest. Robert Jenrick, your colleague in government, the Housing Secretary, is under an awful lot of pressure. He's on the front page of a lot of the newspapers today, which is interesting given all the other stories around that focus on him, over this £1 billion housing development that he approved for Richard Desmond, the billionaire former owner of the Express and Daily Star and OK magazine. It was approved the day before a new tax brought in by the government, which was coming into force, which would the community infrastructure levy, which would have meant that Richard Desmond would have to pay an extra £40 million extra to Tower Hamlets Council, one of the poorest councils in the country, to pay for other local amenities for local people in return for putting up luxury flats. Since when has it been government policy to help billionaire party donors to dodge taxes?
Well, first of all, it's worth reminding your listeners that Robert Jenrick was on his feet for over an hour explaining this in Parliament. He has written in detail to the Select Committee exactly what he did. He was the first to admit that with hindsight, the benefit of hindsight, he could have managed this in a different way. But he also promised the Select Committee that he would publish all documents, all text messages, everything around this issue. And he has done that. Absolute transparency, and so the ray of sunshine is a great disinfectant. And you can see today through all those documentation, he made it very clear to Richard Desmond, the billionaire, as you quite rightly put it, that he can't meet with him on this issue. Robert's absolute energy and focus and intention is to get more homes built and viability. If you look at all the sort of the coverage today on this, and I've been doing lots of interviews on this morning, the word viability is the one that stands out. And ultimately, we can talk about development. We can come on your program and say we want to get young people on the housing ladder. We want more families who've never been able to buy a home to get on a housing ladder. Unless those homes are built in Tower Hamlets or elsewhere, then we won't achieve that.
With all due respect, Nadhim, the apartments were going to be built in this luxury development were almost entirely wildly out of the ability of virtually everyone listening right now to afford. These would have been far more expensive. Even these so-called affordable homes wouldn't have been very affordable. That's not the matter.
Julia, it's also worth you reminding your listeners that actually there's a percentage of affordable housing that was going to be built as well on this development. And Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, Labour Mayor of London, other planning authorities, other mayors have to make these decisions all the time about viability of projects. And if they're not viable, they don't get built and people don't get the housing.
And this is what property developers say to their council. They get their planning approved and they say, the thing is, the costs have overrun. We now can't possibly afford to build as many of those affordable housing units as well as the luxury stuff we're going to make all the profit on. So it won't go ahead unless you give us X amount of money or whatever. This happens all the time. Whether or not there was any wrongdoing, and there seems to be an accusation that he was influenced by the fact that Richard Desmond had met him at a fundraising dinner for the Tory party at which he'd paid £12,000. Whether or not, I don't know. I'm not making any accusations. I'm not privy to this. I'm asking you a simple question. Since when has it been government policy for a government minister to help a billionaire party donor to dodge taxes? The government brought in the tax, the community infrastructure levy. The whole point of this was millionaire property developers make a load of money from these apartments, and if they're not going to build quite so many of these the social housing and the affordable housing, the point is that they're supposed to pay millions of pounds to the local authorities so they can use it to spend on local amenities for local people, so the local people benefit. It was a government policy to have this tax. Why is it, and when did it become government policy for cabinet ministers to try to help billionaire donors to the party avoid that tax? That's what I'm asking.
Well, first of all, as soon as Robert Jenrick felt that there may have been a perception of bias in the way you describe, although he absolutely insists there was no bias in his decision-making, but the perception was there, this thing was pulled, the plug was pulled on it, and a different minister now will actually assess this, as is normal in planning.
With all due respect, you're not answering my question, because the point is that we've got a document that was written by an official in the department which stated that the Secretary of State wanted this decision made before the date when this community infrastructure levy would come into force. Why would a government minister try to seek to help a billionaire property developer who donated to the party or one who hadn't donated to the party? Why would they seek to help anyone avoid paying a tax that the government had brought in to help poorer people in poorer local authorities so that they could actually benefit from these developments? Why would that be in anyone's interest except Richard Desmond's?
Well, first of all, you're able to quote all this at me because it is Robert Jenrick and this government who's published all the documents around, as he promised he would do, to the Select Committee.
Okay.
That is what
I've asked the question.
Secondly,
would you mind giving me the answer?
I'm going to give you the answer. And Robert Jenrick's absolute focus was on viability. If the project is not viable, it doesn't get built. No one gets the SIL money. No one gets anything else if the project is not built. That is the whole point here, Julia. And it's important that we focus on that. This idea that somehow, Robert Jenrick was influenced by Richard Desmond, others, I don't believe. But when he felt the perception was there, he pulled the plug on this, and a different minister will decide this. And Mark Sedwell, the cabinet secretary, has written to the Labour Party, and I wish the Labour Party would, focus on getting kids back to school and vulnerable families and their children back to school, and not sort of use this sort of diversion tactic and innuendo around Robert Jenrick. He's done something wrong. Robert Jenrick has said, look, because of the perception of bias, I will pull away. I will publish everything. I've written in detail to the Select Committee about what I did and how I took that decision. But now a different minister will make the decision. And Mark Sedwell has said that the Prime Minister considers this thing closed.